Now I want to introduce Dr. Les Field, whose talk today is titled, "The Tribe Vanishes, Legibility and the Recognition Petition of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe." Dr. Les Field is a professor of anthropology at the University of New Mexico, where he has been a faculty member since 1994. His areas of research focus are Nicaragua, Colombia, Ecuador, indigenous California, and Palestine, centering on indigenous identities, narrative and history, nationalist ideologies in the state, resources and development, social transformations in landscapes, and conflict zones. His classes range from introductory anthropology classes to classes that focus upon history, society, and culture in the geographical areas where he has conducted fieldwork to graduate-level theory classes. Previously, he taught at Duke University, San Jose State University, and the University of New Hampshire. He has served as a tribal ethnohistorian for the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe since 1991 and has also worked with the Esalen Nation. He is the author of The Grimace of Macho Raton, Artisans, Identity, and Nation in Late 20th Century Western Nicaragua, and Abalone Tales, Collaborative Explorations of California Indian Sovereignty and Identity, both with Duke University Press. He has also co-edited 2 volumes. Without further ado, Dr. Les Field.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not doing a PowerPoint. I think PowerPoints are great, but I'm not very good at them, so this is going to be an old-fashioned paper. It's called The Tribe Vanishes, Legibility and the Recognition Petition of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe. It recounts the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe's process of reaffirming their federal recognition, which necessarily brings together 2 narratives. One is the history of events that have occurred in the history of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe, about which my colleagues Lee and Alan have already presented very informatively and perceptively. The second is the product, is the history of Muwekma's reaffirmation process and the formal petition that the tribe has produced, which is itself based upon that tribal history. It is the second part of the narrative, the Muwekma petition for recognition of their previously recognized status, assembled and submitted during the 1990s and early 21st century, that this paper focuses on. Both of these narratives together tell of an overwhelming preponderance of evidence painstakingly gathered in the pages and hundreds of pages of the Muwekma petition, which simultaneously substantiates the historical and contemporary existence of the Muwekma, in other words, their unbroken historical continuity. At the same time, this narrative shows and relates how much of the evidence and the clearly logical conclusions based upon the evidence have been rendered inadmissible by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Federal Acknowledgement, or OFA. How is this possible? This is a question of legibility, how evidence is not read, understood, or valued by those authorities who make these decisions. The manner in which Muwekma history and contemporary identity are rendered illegible hinges first and foremost on a persistent misunderstanding of their history as one of an unacknowledged native people, when in fact the Muwekma descend from a previously unambiguously recognized tribe. That misunderstanding is facilitated by pervasive misnomers, instances in which the Muwekma Ohlone, even when legible, are identified by governmental and also anthropological authorities alike by names that in no way correspond to how Muwekma people have identified themselves. And in this way, a tribe, a Native American people, notwithstanding their actual unbroken historical continuity, appears to vanish in plain sight, an optical, analytical, and bureaucratic illusion. This very intentional reference to Alfred Hitchcock, if you remember the film The Lady Vanishes, is also meant to communicate the uncanniness, perhaps the creepiness, of an ongoing bureaucratic and political dominant sleight of hand, which reproduces the persistent erasure of Muwekma history, identity, and community, notwithstanding the evidence rendered in their acknowledgement petition. In that light, the first analytic and narrative step in this telling is therefore to state as clearly as possible that the struggle of the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe is not to achieve federal recognition, but rather for the Department of the Interior to reaffirm their previously acknowledged status. The recognition of Native American peoples in this country comprises a history as old as the United States itself, and was for the first century of nationhood determined by the treaties that the U.S. wrote and signed with Native peoples in the process of conquering, dispossessing, and forcibly removing and sharply delimiting the territories and resources of Native peoples in the original 13 states and on an expanding western frontier. That period came to an end in the 1870s, but in the following decades, an alternation of policies directed at further disenfranchising Native peoples of territory and status during the allotment period of the 1880s and subsequently the partial implementation of Native sovereignty as tribes, during the New Deal's Indian Reform Act of 1934, and a return then subsequently to a complete abrogation of treaties and recognition in the 1950s termination period, the post-1960s activist era and Nixonian reassertion of tribal sovereignty, and so on, all has led to an indeterminate and inconclusive situation for Native peoples who were either never recognized or had been previously recognized, but disenfranchised in various ways. The deficiencies of that situation led to the 1975 Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs creation of the American Indian Policy Review Commission, or AIPRC, which in turn led to an administrative process known as 25 CFR 83 that Alan has already referred to, that instituted a federal acknowledgement process, or FAP, whose regulations were issued in 1978. It is crucial to understand that 25 CFR 83 was directed by the Department of the Interior only at Indian tribes who, quote, existence has not been previously acknowledged by the Department of the Interior, unquote. The FAP, administered by what was previously known as the BAR, or Branch of Acknowledgement and Research, and currently as OFA, or Office of Federal Acknowledgement, determines whether a petitioning Indian tribe had prior federal acknowledgement during what is called the technical assistance phase of reviewing the petition. And this is actually what occurred in the Muwekma case. Muwekma history, through the strength of the data presented in the petition, was thus defined by descendancy from a previously recognized Native group. The Department of the Interior document also states clearly that there are other pathways to federal acknowledgement. Number one, the Congress through legislative action, and number two, the President by executive order, have the power to acknowledge tribes applicable to tribes that have never been recognized or to ones that have been. By contrast, the way of federal acknowledgement by Congress or by the President, that's only applicable to tribes that have never been recognized. By contrast, the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs in the Department of the Interior has been empowered to reaffirm previously recognized Indian tribes and has done so several times in the state of California since the mid-1990s. The Ayom Band of Miwoks in 1994, Lower Lake Rancheria in 2000, and the Tohon Tribe in 2012. 3 moments in the history of Muwekma's petition clearly elucidate that Muwekma history links the contemporary tribe to a previously recognized Native American tribe. The most consequential historic misnomer for the Muwekma ancestors, the Verona Band, recurs in these statements. So I'm going to do 3 statements right now from the 90s and early 2000s. On May 24, 1996, after the first review of the Muwekma recognition petition, a letter was issued to Muwekma by Ms. Deborah Maddox, Director of the Office of Tribal Services, which stated, quote, based upon the documentation provided and the BIA's background study on federal acknowledgement in California between 1887 and 1933, we have concluded on a preliminary basis that the Pleasanton or Verona Band of Alameda County was previously acknowledged between 1914 and 1927. The band was among the groups identified as bands under the jurisdiction of the Indian Agency at Sacramento, California. The agency dealt with the Verona Band as a group and identified it as a distinct social and political entity. Number one. Number two, in the year 2000, the United States Federal District Court of the District of Columbia recognized in Muwekma Tribe versus Babbitt that, quote, the Muwekma Tribe is a tribe of Ohlone Indians indigenous to the present-day San Francisco Bay Area. In the early part of the 20th century, the Department of the Interior recognized the Muwekma tribe as an Indian tribe under the jurisdiction of the United States. In more recent times, however, and despite its steadfast efforts, the Muwekma tribe has been unable to obtain federal recognition, a status vital for its tribe and its members. And finally, in 2006, number 3, the United States Federal District Court of the District of Columbia stated in Muwekma Tribe versus Kempthorne that, quote, "The following facts are not in dispute. Not in dispute. Muwekma is a group of American Indians indigenous to the San Francisco Bay Area, the members of which are direct descendants of the historical Mission San Jose tribe, also known as the Pleasanton or Verona Band of Alameda County. From 1914 to 1927, the Verona Band was recognized by the federal government as an Indian tribe. Neither Congress nor any executive agency ever formally withdrew federal recognition of the Verona Band," unquote. When we link these three declarations together, the logical question is not what more could the Muwekma petition do to reaffirm their recognized status, but rather, how can it be that reaffirmation has not already occurred officially? Yet, in 2006, the Department of the Interior reached a negative determination with respect to the Muwekma petition, based primarily, and quoting from the federal determination document, because, quote, "the petitioning group has not been identified as an Indian entity on a substantially continuous basis since 1927. Therefore, the petitioner does not meet the requirements of Criterion 83.7a, which requires that the petitioning entity have been identified by reliable external sources on a substantially continuous basis as an Indian entity since 1900, unquote." Okay, from what we have elaborated so far, we can reach a rather startling conclusion. That is, once the OFA and Interior concluded that the Muwekma tribal leadership was understood to comprise, one and all, only the descendants of a previously recognized tribe, the FAP and the stipulations of 25 CFR 83 no longer applied, because that legislation applies only to tribes who were never recognized, which consequently means that the negative determination, whatever the fallacies of which I will soon elucidate, is entirely irrelevant and specious, because it refers back to legislation that is simply not relevant to a previously recognized tribe like Muwekma. It is impossible to overestimate the enormity of this conclusion, nor to sharply wonder how this was not clear and legible to OFA. But who were the misnamed Verona Band, whose relation to the Muwekma Ohlone Tribe affirms their previously recognized status? What were the actual names Muwekma ancestors used to refer to their people, which track the history that substantiates their continuous existence, documented into the petition and forming the basis for the reaffirmation of their recognized status?